we should go more into enforcement. And that's what we hope to see in the new PFM program, 2022 to 2025, that seeks to build on sustainability instead of consolidation. That we should focus more on enforcement powers. That is, the institutions that have the power to sanction, they should apply the sanctions. And they are not applying those sanctions because of the political economy issues. Because people are afraid to apply the laws, and because some people are very politically exposed and politically powerful, so they are not applying the sanctions. And one other challenge too we have is that some of the institutions, their appointments are so tied to the executive. For example, if you take procurement and down from the board to the entity tender committee, you see excessive influence of the executive. So that makes it very difficult for them to act independently. And those are some of the food for thought. I agree with you that we should start looking at how do we break key public institutions away from political influence. So for that, I agree entirely with you. And on the internal audit functions rule, what we observe is that the role of the internal audit function in MDAs, to some extent, has broken down, because the main integrated financial management system that is used to pay and procure goods for public institutions, the internal auditor is not on that platform. So what they do is that the activities occur and they collect data and do assessment. And if their assessment and reports are even complied with, these irregularities would be corrected even before the external auditor comes in. So it appears that within the internal audit role within our MDAs, their job is not being taken serious, or they do not have sufficient powers to also control the expenditure of public institutions. Another challenge is that if you look at the organizational structure of our public institutions, the internal auditor's position is very low. So they have very low decision-making power. So when the big bosses are making decisions about spending, they are not part. For example, they are not part of the entity tender committee. So when irregularities happen in procurement, they are supposed to quality assure the process. Like the police officer who is supposed to ensure compliance is not even part of the process, the process where the action is taking place. So they are always outside the spending, and they always come in to just report. That's why you don't see a lot on the internal. That's why we even highlighted it as a major problem in the PFM, if we can ensure sustainability and enhance accountability. We also agree with disaggregating the data by the Auditor General. They present the report in a lump, or they lump all the irregularities together. So we don't know how much did only GRA contribute to this irregularity. Because if you take the tax irregularity of about 9.2 billion alone, we attribute over 95% to the Ministry of Finance and its subsidiary agencies. So we should be able to know that beyond GRA and the Controlling Accountant General's Department, what other subsidiary agencies are within the Ministry of Finance who are also contributing to this or these sort of irregularities that we are seeing.
And there we are, Dennis Asari, who is a consultant with IMANI Africa. But that's the level of fiscal recklessness we have seen from some of our ministries, departments, and agencies over a 5-year period. 13.9 billion, accounting for 3.64% of GDP in 2020. And if you look over the span of the years, 0.52%. How do we mitigate the situation now that we have this ignominious list? We get into the matter with our guests. Let me start with Dennis Asari, who joins us in the studio with IMANI Africa. Dennis, thank you for joining the conversation.
Thanks for having me, and good morning to our viewers.
Great. Just hold it for me, because I'm bringing in Isaac Kofi Ajay, our bespectacled Isaac Kofi Ajay. How are you this morning, Isaac?
I'm great.
It's been a while.
Yeah. Good.
Thanks for coming by. So let's do a bit of a breakdown of what IMANI tells us in this latest Fiscal Recklessness Index. Walk us through what you have for us.
So just like you said, cumulatively over the period of 5 years, that's from 2015 to 2020, financial irregularities is about 13.9 billion Ghana cedis. And just like you said, this is about 3.64% of the 2020 GDP. And now if you should break this down in terms of the types of irregularities, you can see that tax irregularities is number one, with close to 9.2 billion Ghana cedis, which is accounting for 65.49% of the total, irregularities. And if you look at cash irregularities, it's number two, 2.9 billion Ghana cedis, accounting for more than 21%. Debt, loans, and advances, That's around 1.2 billion Ghana cedis, accounting for 8.58% of the total amount of irregularities. Contract, 387 million Ghana cedis, 2.78%. Stores and procurement irregularities, that's around 136 million Ghana cedis, accounting for almost 1%. And we have payroll irregularities being the least, 14.6 million Ghana cedis, that's around 0.1%.
Kofi, it's interesting, just to stay right there a bit. Yeah. It interests me, tax irregularities, and that's where it starts trickling down, right? Exactly. Because the GRA also comes into the mix.
It's a component of the finance ministry.
And so enforcement, obviously lacking some enforcement there. But I was just doing the breakdown. So the figure, 13.9 billion, if I use today's conversion rates, we're looking at almost $2 billion.
When you put it in dollars, it scares me. So let's leave it in cedis. So if you just do a comparative analysis, the Auditor General's report in terms of, financial irregularities, if we look at from 2010 to 2014, that's around 1.42 billion Ghana cedis. And just within this period, that's 2015 to 2020, it's around 13.9 billion cedis. If you strike the percentage change, it's around more than 870% increase from 2014 to 2015, if you should do a comparative analysis. And this is huge. Just look at the two, bar graph, and you could see the kind of difference, between what we had between 2010 and 2014 and what we have between 2015 and 2020. Huge difference over there. And just like Dennis said, let's focus on the finance ministry, because if you look at tax irregularities alone, it's about 9.12 billion Ghana cedis. And if you should do a breakdown, the finance ministry is accounting for more than 99.6%. Just compare what the finance ministry is contributing to other MDAs, and you could see a huge difference. Just look at finance ministry.
They're contributing basically 0.37%, and the finance ministry alone is contributing 99.63%.
And that's worrying actually, because that's a huge difference between the finance ministry. If you add just cash irregularities and tax irregularities together, the finance ministry is hovering around 11 billion Ghana cedis of irregularities in terms of these two categories. Now, let's rank the ministries. Finance ministry, number 1. Dennis is here, I'm sure he'll break this down, but I know that the scale is from 0 to 1, meaning that if you are nearing 1, it makes you the highest reckless MDA in terms of the ranking. And the finance ministry is number 1, ranking somewhere around almost 0.9
out of the 1.
Exactly, over 1. And then health ministry is following with 0.1%.
Even when you look at the levels of recklessness, again, this will paint the picture why the finance ministry is at 99.63%. Exactly. Because you look at 0.87 compared to 0.10.
That's more.
So you see the
gap. That's almost like 9 times.
Exactly.
9 times. So finance ministry and then the ministry after is almost like nine times. The difference is huge. Almost 0.9 to 1%. That's almost like 9 times what the finance ministry is contributing. And if I didn't do that, but if you look at the best performing, you can see somewhere the Ministry of Information,
right,
another ministry.
Chieftaincy is the best, but we also know there are certain circumstances that make that possible.
I'm sure Dennis will go deeper into this, but just let's look at the tax irregularities and cash irregularities. Let's look at some of the reasons. And some of the reasons are, GRA is failing to collect taxes due to the state and enforce compliance. If you look at cash irregularities, the cash irregularities are largely driven by unapproved disbursement of funds, and then we have unapproved transfer of funds and delays in the lodgement of public funds into the respective public accounts. And I was reading from the report, and it says MDAs, they lose around somewhere close to 2.6 billion annually as a result of financial irregularities annually. So Ben, that's what you have at the moment. Quite worrying figures over there. I'm just looking at this graph, and it fascinates me. Just look at the difference between what we had from 2010 to 2014 and 2015 to 2020. Huge difference, man.
And that's exactly what we're going to explore. What accounts for this damage being done to us when it comes to fiscal recklessness? Have the floodgates been opened so that now let's be fiscally reckless? And questions like finance ministries across the world are some of the most efficient and effective because they have oversight responsibilities to ensure that others are also effective and efficient.
The whole process starts with them and ends with them.
But in this instance, they are the worst performing. We'll get into the details. But Kofi, thank you so much for joining us for the research and analysis. So we come into the studio now, and we'll be here with Dennis Asare, who is with IMANI Africa. What triggered this entire enterprise? This is the second one that you're releasing. Why this index?
So thank you very much, and good morning once again. If you look at the sustainability threats that we face as a country, it has become imperative for us to start looking internally, because if you don't start now, a time will come where we will be forced to find a way to raise money to manage this country. In fact, if you look at between 2021
aren't we there already?
Well, to some extent, because
our budgets are always tied to the apron strings of
I agree with
institutions, our debt to GDP. Aren't we there already?
Yeah, I think we are there, but the opportunities available for us to correct them are available, and there are many. And if you sit down and look at how far we are from our sustainable development goals, and that we need to raise about $43 billion annually if we can prosecute all those goals. And if you look at the financing gap of over $437 billion, it tells us that it has become imperative for us to start looking within. Where are the leakages? And there's been always a complaint by government that we are not raising enough revenue. And if you check the statistics, our revenue has peaked around $9.8 billion since 2018. And the government intends to raise more even in 2022, if you look at the revenue projections of 100 billion Ghana cedis. That notwithstanding, we believe that there are still opportunities within our MDAs where we are losing a lot that we are not paying attention to. So what the Fiscal Recklessness Index does is it critically examines the financial performance, or let me say the financial irregularities of ministries, departments, and agencies, particularly because the overarching aim of our PFM is to deliver quality service. And that if spending institutions or MDAs are not being efficient in the use of the meager public funds, then the service that we are looking for, we are not going to get that. So this actually gauges the efficiency of the overall PFM in addressing the pitfalls in the management of public funds. And the first one, we looked at the period between 2010 and 2014. So this is actually looking at between 2015 and 2020. And it's very interesting that anytime the Fiscal Recklessness Index has been launched, an old PFM reform program is exiting and a new one is coming on board. In fact, the 2014 one, the 2016 one ended a period where we're about to start a new PFM framework. And now this one comes at a time where the government also wants to implement another PFM reform between 2022 and 2025. So it gives us some sort of time to reflect on how far we have come. If MDAs are losing such huge amount of money, and if you try to look at the irregularities between 2015 and 2020 and compare it to the budget of the Education Ministry in 2021, it's almost the same. So the irregularities of MDAs over a 5-year period can finance a whole ministry. And it is shocking that even least irregularity typologies like contract, where we wasted about 386 million over the period, it can finance it could finance the budget of the Ministry of Gender in 2019. And even finance the Livelihood Empowerment Against Poverty program about 2 times. So it tells us that
even finance the e-levy
by
about twice.
Yes, I mean, if you look at the amount we have lost, almost 14 billion, government expect about 6.8 billion from the e-levy. It means that it's more like twice of the e-levy. And so it tells us that there are opportunities for us to block the leakages, efficiently use the monies that we raise, and ensure that we cut some of the increasing in debts that we are accumulating. So this gives us time to reflect internally and look at how we can address the pitfalls in our public financial management.
All right, interesting question. We have the laws and the regulations, and we have the Auditor General's department where you sourced the information from. The Auditor General's department also has the right to disallow and surcharge.
Yes.
How come all of this is not working?
So I think that's an interesting question, because the Constitution actually gives the Auditor General the power to disallow. Let me bring you into the cash irregularities because it accounts for about 21% of the total irregularities. And if you look at the causes of the irregularities, some of them are people lodging public funds into private accounts, making
people lodging public funds into their personal accounts.
Their personal accounts. There are times where people make payment and there are no vouchers to even support such payment. Unapproved spending of IGF. And these are some of the little irregularities that you should disallow to deter people from doing that. For example, there are banks who collect taxes on behalf of government and they fail to lodge it within the time frame. How do we sanction such people? So the Auditor General over the years has not been very active in applying that power. And I think that is why it's created some sort of tolerance for the abuse, tolerance for the irregularities within the MDAs. And that power, and it was even confirmed in the Occupy Ghana case in Supreme Court. So the Auditor General has not been consistently doing that. And that is why we see this profligate spending and flagrant abuse of our PFM laws. And that is one of the areas that we highlight that if we can make headway, then we should get to a point where we stop making recommendations. The Auditor General constantly makes recommendations of the abuse. Meanwhile, you have the power to disallow the transaction and let people pay back. And that is the only way we can tell people.
If I recall correctly, a certain Daniel Yao Domelevo started a bit of a process, surcharging here and there, Kroll and Associates and others.
And so that's where the political economy issues come in.
We all know how that went.
Yeah, it appears that maybe there are some level of powers that you can't get to. But I mean, once you have the power given to you by the Constitution, and I'm sure any government or any leader of a country would be glad to see you sanctioning spending officers in a various ministry that this cost, we are going to disallow it and need to bring back the money. And one of the challenges is that the heads of entities of our MDAs are not helping with accountability. So once we start disallowing and surcharging, it puts them on the edge to start looking within how to avoid some errors that they would have to pay back or some monies that when they spend, they are going to be sanctioned. Once we don't do that and you start thinking about perhaps who will come after you when you disallow, then all of this work that we are doing, we are not going to get anywhere. So the Auditor General has the power. The Auditor General must use it.
How are you, by putting forward this research, how do you mean to, because you can't compel the Auditor General at any specific time. Until Daniel Domelevo, we didn't even know that some of these actions could actually be taken until he started, rolling them out. We can't compel an Auditor General to do this. So where do we go?
So, I mean, I think that's where civil society comes in very strongly. Because for us as civil society, we have a critical role to play in the PFM cycle. That is ensuring the budget transparency and accountability. So that is what we are actually trying to do, that if you are not following up, then we would demand that accountability from you for you to exert that mandate given to you. And additionally, one way we can also do, we are also doing that is that from here, we are planning to meet the Parliament Account Committee, the Public Accounts Committee in Parliament, to share these findings and let them know how reckless our MDAs are. And I think if we had gone into the index, you see that beyond the Ministry of Finance and Health, you see that most of the MDAs are moderately reckless. So it appears that it's not only an issue of two agencies, but it's happened across every aspect of our public administration. And that it is about time we start thinking about how we cut these irregularities. This is just for ministries, department, agencies. Can you imagine if you go into the Public Boards Corporation, the MMDs? So, I mean, we will be running into even 100.
Yes. We know about the saga with that.
Yes, and I mean, we'll be running into about 100 billion. So it means we have a lot of opportunity to cut the leakages. And when we're able to effectively do that, what we demonstrate to Parliament is that some of the tax measures that we are trying to bring on board may be unnecessary because we find ways to increase the efficiency of our domestic resource utilization, as well as find avenues of increasing mobilization. Because if you look at the tax irregularity, these are monies due the state that are not collected. For example, about 10 OMCs lifted oil from Temaoyo refinery, and tax of about 33 million cedis were not paid.
Went down the drain.
Went down the drain. And
in whose pocket did these go? And if they didn't, why was that slippage allowed?
If we can't tell that it went
No,
into
I'm not asking you.
Yes,
I'm just saying that generally.
delay, the lag in paying the tax also affect the government mobilization.
Right.
Because if the government is unable to raise the needed revenue, it means that the programs that it has developed, it can't do that. So some private entities sit somewhere, delay payment of taxes, and that consequently affect government's ability to implement programs to address the poverty that we are currently experiencing. I mean, think about 28 OMCs owing the government about 226 million Ghana cedis. And these are taxes that people should pay. Go to the medium taxpayer offices and small taxpayer offices, and the Auditor General finds that people owe the government about, if you look at the corporate and income taxes, almost 836 million. And so you tell yourself that sometimes the outstanding taxes can even finance 2 or 3 ministries' expenditure. So there's money within the system that we are not collecting.
Okay. Dennis, let's quickly do this. And before we do our walk of shame, and that's what I call it, it's a walk of shame when we look at the list from the finance ministry down to the chieftaincy ministry and how they are bleeding our country when it comes to fiscal recklessness. Before we get there, I would have us get into the itemized bits, from payroll to rent to contracts and all of the other things, components that form this bit. But so maybe briefly before that, that also means, you know, sometimes there are sessions that people say maybe, let's say some beneficiaries of this scheme or that scheme are supposed to be paid some money. And you would hear from the finance ministry or the controller and accountants general that we've made payments, yet the money doesn't trickle down. Is it true from this report, from some of what you gather, or is it likely to be true that it is indeed possible that some people at the helm of affairs invest the money in their own accounts till they get certain, what do you even call that? When you deposit money, so interest before they, is that a reality?
I mean, for the Auditor General to consistently report on people putting public funds into personal accounts, people delaying lodgement of funds, and even sometimes the banks are corporate, collecting taxes on behalf of government and failing to lodge them within the time frame required by the PFM. It tells you that then there's the likelihood that maybe some sort of benefit is within that kind of delay. But let me also draw attention to, if you look at the PFM framework, one of the challenges that we also see is that sometimes the revenue targets these MDAs, that's ministries, department agencies set, are unrealistic. So when they are unable to achieve those revenue targets and they have to implement the programs that they've planned or initiated, they will now have to now fall on the monies that they are collecting for government to implement them. So it's more about being realistic about revenue targets, and that should reflect in the expenditure programs that we put out there.
That's a very interesting point.
So the planning is the
so
problem.
Sometimes it is not so much of their overspending or being fiscally reckless, but you know that realistically you can rake in 10 million Ghana cedis this year. You go and make a projection of 17 million. And then at a point in time, you realize you're going to fall short of your target. So you must get into your IGFs.
Yes.
Internally generated funds to now meet the target. And then it becomes a problem because that will also leave you with a deficit.
Yes, I mean, and the challenge is that you wouldn't be able to provide government with a timely revenue because what you are spending has not been approved. And so within the broader public financing framework that has been approved for the year, that thing does not fall into it, and it has not been recognized that this project should be funded by this IGF. And that's why the Auditor General will flag it up as an irregularity because it's an unapproved spending. Also, misallocation of funds. So beyond the planning, within these institutions, we have that sort of a challenge where, so getting back to your question, once the Auditor General reports that, that tendency may be there. But largely, some of these spending, like spending statutory funds and also delays in lodging funds, misapplication of funds, they are all issues related to lack of proper planning in terms of revenue and expenditure projections. So those are some of the critical issues we need to start bringing on board here.
Okay. I see a number of you sending in messages. At the right time, we'll get to those messages as we activate the phone lines as well. In case you just joined us, we have Dennis Asare of IMANI Africa in the studio, and he's walking us through the latest Fiscal Recklessness Index. But so let's get into the typologies, the components, the payroll and all of that. And let's look at why some of these problems are even surfacing.
Okay, so let's start with the tax. I think that's the big...
that's the biggest.
That's the biggest and the one that I think is making the news. Because taxes are very essential to government spending and everything, I think that's how governments implement programs. So if you look at the tax irregularities over the period, if you compare the 9.1 billion tax irregularities or 9.2 billion tax irregularities, it is higher than how much we've even spent on free SHS between 2017 and 2021, and the Education Ministry estimate about 7.7 billion.
For a 4-year period.
For a 4-year period.
More than what we've spent on free SHS.
Yes, what we have lost on just taxes uncollected, taxes are unaccounted for, delays in paying taxes, is even more than a critical social intervention, how much we spend on a critical social intervention like free SHS. And the main drivers, as we have already said, people not paying taxes, we're not going after that. And the main drivers is the weak compliance enforcement. Generally, there's a sort of a very poor compliance culture within our society. And the institutions established to enforce the compliance, to a large extent, sometimes are not being effective in ensuring that these compliances are enforced. For example, the GRA knows the people who are owing us and that they should go after them. For example, if the Auditor General reports that about, let's say, 100 VAT payee owners who filed their VAT owe this amount of money, it means that then we know them. So it's a matter of ensuring compliance. And sometimes within enforcing the compliance are issues of integrity, issues about systems of ensuring that that sort of compliance that we want to see. So it's more like if you put all the issues together, there's a problem with integrity. Sometimes, whilst these officers go on the field to go and collect the taxes, to some extent, there's been reports that some may be cutting deals with some of these debtors of the state, and that some that they are able to get away with some taxes that they are supposed to pay. There's the integrity problem. Then again, there's also the systems that we have in place. That's why over the years, you see the GRE also trying hard to implement technological systems to ensure, to enhance the sort of tax enforcement or compliance enforcement that we want to see. So we are making progress, but it appears the progress is very slow. And that what we want to see is that the little or the people that we know them, we should enforce the compliance. For example, people sit within the free zones and they are given tax exemptions without approval from Parliament. And sometimes, even when the GRE goes after them, there are delays. And one other delays that we've also seen is that sometimes within some of these tax irregularities are issues that have been either in courts or taxes that are being argued, or there are some administrative procedures that have been initiated but have not been completed. So we can't say that those taxes have been collected. So there's a whole set of problems contributing to a myriad set of issues contributing to the tax irregularities we are seeing. But the main drivers are unaccounted for, outstanding taxes, taxes we are not collecting. In fact, I think in the 2018 Public Accounts Committee report, the GRA even mentioned some companies that they owe the state, but they can't find them. So people can owe taxes, shut down these businesses, register new businesses with different names, running the same sort of activities, and you can't even find them. So there's also that sort of bad behavior on the part of businesses who are not complying with the
But should that even be possible? You know, those point again to the loopholes.
The loopholes in the compliance
Because I was reading just today in the Daily Graphic about the whole getting the tin feeding into the Ghana card bit, because some people actually register multiple tins. And you can have them for different aspects of business. And so they would use this tin 1 for this reason because it suits them, and tin 3 for all of that. But it shouldn't even have been possible to do that. These are
the kind of the fragilities within, or the weaknesses within the enforcement measures that we are, we are implementing. So it's about time. That's why now they are using the Ghana card number as your tin. What they are trying to do is to streamline and address all of these issues where one person or one institution can have multiple tins, because that's where the leakage is. So if someone will be operating with this tin, but may not be paying the tax on that, and jump onto a different tin number and will be doing reporting with that, and it makes the reconciliation very tough. So let's acknowledge that the GRA is doing their best, Controlling Accountant General is doing their best, but if we don't enhance the enforcement right from the government institutional level, it will be very difficult for us to now get into the informal sector where the compliance culture is even very poor. So I think those are the issues that highly contribute to the tax irregularities. Now, when you come to the cash, I think we've already mentioned some of them. This on honored checks, payment without vouchers, people paying government funds into their private account, misallocation of funds. Sometimes funds that are destined for a particular program will now be pushed to sponsor a different activity. And all of these are flagged up. And these are some of the critical issues. And the major issue too is that the internal audit system is not functioning effectively, because since 2015, we have an integrated financial information management system that is used for payment and procuring goods and services for the MDAs. But the internal audit function that's supposed to quality assure the process is not on that platform. So it's like building a street and preaching that there should be security there, and you don't put in the police there. So the police within our PFM system is the internal auditor. So if the internal auditor's work is now limited to firefighting, then all of these errors can occur before the internal auditor even comes in. So there's a challenge with the internal audit situation and lack of applying institutional sanctions. The entity heads are not helping, because as a head of entity, you have a responsibility to ensure that the spending officers within your ministry, your department or agency comply with the PFM rules. So if consistently people are abusing the PFM laws and you are failing to apply the institutional sanctions, then you are also part of the problem.
You are complicit.
Yes, you are
because you are the supervisory agency.
Yes, and there are times where we cite reports where they are part, or they are in arrangement, or they agree with some of these spending officers to engage in the misallocation of funds. They are part of even the use of funds for inappropriate activities. So they, as a head of entity, should start helping the government, because at the implementation level, the Ministry of Finance may not be there.
Right.
But the head of entity must ensure, because you are the chief, or let me say, you lead the team in terms of even procurement and everything, to ensure the PFM rules are applied. Because we are not doing that, people are not deterred. And as you rightly said, they are also complicit, or like they are complicit in the whole action. And for me, the greatest challenge is how do we make the internal audit function very effective? Now, there's a bill to make them even a service agency to be very independent and bring all the internal auditors together. At the moment, some are managed by the local government, some are managed by SIGA, some also under the internal audit agency.
Right.
With the new bill,
like the SOEs and
yes,
SIGA.
So
right.
when we bring all of them together, we'll be able to streamline their functions, and they'll get some level of independence in their work. Their power to do the right quality assuring process is very weak. And they can't even sanction their bosses. All they can do is to write reports. As to whether their reports are followed through, that's also a challenge. If you come to stores and procurement, the Auditor General estimates that within a 10-year period, procurement irregularities are about 143.6 million Ghana cedis. And between 2016 and 2020, we've lost about 136 million cedis to stores and procurement irregularities. So it means that a period where we are improving our PFM, a period where we are bringing more on board or enhancing our Public Procurement Act, building a technology to even streamline procurement activities, the irregularities are increasing. And one major problem too is the weakness in the internal audit function. Again, the lack of application of sanction. People abuse the procurement rules and no sanctions are applied. In fact,
time and again we hear of that.
Yeah, and
especially that procurement.
Procurement. And before we even launched this, I think a month ago, we also launched another report critically looking at the procurement branch of the PFM. And 9 out of 10 cases of procurement irregularities is clear abuse of the law, and there are no sanctions being applied.
Within the period, 2015 to 2020?
Yeah, and the procurement work we did was between 2010 and 2020.
2010 and 2020.
And let me say the composite procurement irregularities for MDAs was about 143 million. In the case of public boards and corporation, it was about 1.4 billion Ghana cedis. Irregularities. And if you look at the drivers of these irregularities, they are just clear people making procurement agreements without complying with the procurement law. For example, people are awarding single sourcing contracts without seeking approval from the PPE. People are awarding, so people are...
And there are processes to follow, just for the sake of those watching us. There are processes to follow. For you to if you're going to single source, there are processes to follow.
You have to get approval from the PPE. In fact, in the case of, I think, Ghana Maritime...
Did you say the PPA?
Yeah, the PPA.
We all know that the PPA itself
but I think
has had its own
yes, but we
procurement problems. Let me leave it at that.
Yeah, I think, but beyond that, that is another quality assurance process that the single sourcing that we are doing are not abused, because over the period, the contracts that we're able to track of about 11 MDAs, we're able to identify that the composite financial value of procurement contract of the MDAs that we looked at was about 19 billion cedis. Out of that, 18 billion was procured through single sourcing. Meanwhile, if you come and check the methods that were used, largely open competitive Open competitive tendering was a dominant method. But if you look at the financial value of contracts, you are likely to see that single sourcing method will be used for high financial value contracts. That's why you are seeing that just $1 billion of the 19 went into open competitive
tendering. So basically what you're saying is where you are seeing the open competitive tendering, the sums of money involved are minuscule. But when it comes to the single sourcing, so you may even have a lot of them being open tender. But the few ones that are single source are so high that it then impacts the general sum. So what this points to is that this is intentional.
To some extent, because the essence of using single sourcing and restricted tender is sometimes you have to play competitive within a market where there are few sellers. So if within your procurement spending, a chunk of just about 11 MDAs, their procurement contract that we're able to track, over 90% go through a non-competitive method. Because the idea behind the competitive tendering is to ensure that we bring the price down and there's some sort of competition. Within the single sourcing, there's no competition. So if that's where the chunk of the money is going, then it creates a lot of problem. And if you look at the Auditor General's report, over the 10 years, you see that anytime an irregularity has been identified, 6 out of 10 cases, the contract method that was used was either single sourcing or restricted tender.
This is bonkers. I mean, what you're telling me.
So that's where the abuse is happening.
Right.
For example, people spend about 1.1 million Ghana cedis using the wrong method. The law is clear on even thresholds and the method you can use. In the case of Ghana Maritime Authority, there's a time that with over, I think about 8 contracts, they spend almost 1.1 million. And consistently, the method they adopted was wrong. And that tells you that...
You see why I was talking about intentionality? Because then...
To some extent,
if your method has been wrong consistently, of course, oversight responsibility, supervision, obviously not there. And then a certain will not to do the right thing, obviously would be there.
That also raises the question about the quality assurance within the ministry, because every agency that's a procurement entity has an entity tender committee. And if you look at the composition of the entity tender committees, there are about 9 people. If you take the case of MDs, out of the 9, almost 6, if you include the procurement officer, that's about 7 people, are government, maybe let's say government workers or people within the ministry, if you take out the Attorney General's representative on the ETC. So how do you expect the same agency to hold itself accountable? And that's the reason why our audit report implementation committees have not been effective. Because if you look at their composition, the people who the Auditor General have made very horrible reports of, and you expect them to implement the same reforms or recommendations, that will not happen. So at the entity level, we see that there's that breakdown in accountability that we can get. If you look at the ETCs, the independent people that are on the ETCs are just 2. How do they even hold the about 6 people accountable to ensure that the laws are followed? And if
it's
and
like
you know the surprising thing,
and the referee most of the time. So in other words, that is also a pointer to the fact that we don't want to do the right thing.
To some extent.
Because if you want a process that will ensure fiscal discipline. You can empanel definitely at least more people who are not within the operative, institutions. But if you have a lot of them from the operative institutions, and if they are they are engaging in the rot, who will go and sit there and sanction himself or herself?
And
or his
I cannot agree more with you, because procurement involves a huge amount of money. And so you will need some sort of independent group quality assuring the process for you. But you build an ETC where the people spending the money are the ones trying to quality assure the process. And that's why we are not going forward with, and in most of the irregularities, you see that some of the contracts were approved by the ETC. Now, if you come down to issues related to rent, these are rent due the states that are not being paid. Payroll issues were critically other unearned salaries. That is, sometimes instances where people have been moved into a different institution, but their salaries are consistently being paid. There are instances where people who have retired and their salaries are being paid. People who are, who are even dead and their salaries are paid. And this issue of ghost names, payment of salaries that we can't even verify. So these are some of the issues that goes into the payroll, but these are just a smaller component of the irregularities. But if you look at what those monies could do for us, we need to start critically looking at, for me, we need to bring the conversation to the cash and tax irregularity, because over the period, and this is not new, if you look at our previous report, tax and cash irregularity combined averagely contribute over 80% of the total irregularities MDAs are incurring. And if year on year, MDAs are incurring about 2.3 billion between 2015 and 2020 averagely. It tells you that the PFM system is not really working to protect the public purse as we speak.
I'll be coming back to you, but let me go via Zoom and have an engagement there with Professor Lord Mensah, lecturer at the University of Ghana Business School. Professor Mensah, a very good morning to you, sir.
Yeah, good morning, and good morning to our viewers.
Right. So, I mean, we've already kickstarted the conversation. You look at our Constitution, Article 195, appointment of the Controller General and what that department is expected to do, Article 187, and what it also says about the other dynamics, especially in terms of punitive measures and in the performance of some of these agencies. But it appears nothing is working. Not disallowance, not surcharge, and the ministries, departments, and agencies are simply bleeding us. What is your initial reaction to this latest Fiscal Recklessness Index?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it is an index that it's long overdue. I mean, for a country to have such a benchmark measure to determine, you know, the way funds are used and the way funds are sourced. You know, very, very important because it seems like the government agencies, I mean, I think this was targeted towards MDAs. I think if they should, you know, extend it to other agencies, it's going to be worse off because clearly the attitude of, I mean, government business. So it's not my business. I'm just transiting in it. And as a result of that, whatever happens in terms of cash management, in terms of, you know, tax collection and all those, I'm not that bothered. That attitude has stayed with us all this while. And if in Chi, I should say that they said, and a bind does not exist. We need to understand that our bind is me and you. Effectively, for me, it's a good step in the right direction and come out, I mean, to indicate that the possible, you know, exigencies or the possible overloads when it comes to, you know, funds is good because a country that is struggling with its revenue generation, these are some of the possible, I mean, leakages that if we have an index of that sort and we are able to, you know, block these leakages, I should be able to enhance our revenue collection. But then there's that culture, like I said earlier, of government business being no man's business with us. As a result of that, affecting the way we even manage cash, you know, when it comes to government business and the way we, I mean, target revenue and then possibly on the grounds revenue collection when it comes to government business. So to me, it's a step in the right direction. But the surprising thing is that the ministries that were, you know, were performing badly when it comes to this index, like the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Health, and I mean, roads and highways are very, very sensitive ministries. And if they are topping this index as Fiscal Recklessness Index, then it calls to question because
just how shocking, Prof, is it for you? Because, like you rightly mentioned, elsewhere these are, I mean, they are critical, and these are the ones that in most jurisdictions you would find being the most fiscally disciplined. In our case, it's the reverse. Just how bad is it?
Yeah, if you look at it carefully, because most of the time, some of this, I mean, recklessness spending has to do with your understanding of, you know, finance and possibly delay in payments of cash and all those are part of the losses that we may consider. I mean, if you look at the methods that were applied in this index formation. Clearly, we associate that to financial literacy. Because, I mean, when you delay in funds payment, when you delay in sourcing for funds, it has its own impact. But that delay, which we normally call float, normally we consider the alternative use of the funds if it was to come early. But the question is, how many people have this know-how, understanding that maybe if you delay in payment, or possibly if you appropriate funds where it's not supposed to go, it's a loss to the country. I think it has to do with financial education, and we have to do more in terms of capacity building. And the reason why I said I'm shocked with the Ministry of Finance is that, because I mean, they are managing finances, and I'm expecting the capacity they have will appreciate some of these, basics in cash management and possibly revenue collection processes. And so that is why I am shocked. But then with the health ministry, I mean, you cannot afford delay payment and all those in health ministry. If you look at that, possibly it can affect, the operations of that ministry. A ministry that is dealing with, human, health, which is a foundation of every nation. I wasn't expecting, something of that. But for roads ministries and, it's that is where we have a lot of infrastructure, development going on. And with this infrastructure development, the tendencies, that we're going to have misappropriation and, delay in payment, tactical delay in payment, it's obvious because that reflects in the roads that we even, construct on our roads. If you look at the roads that are supposed to, last for 5 years, you end up, seeing the road for only maybe a year, and the road will get, rotten. That tells you that, a lot of things went on before the contract was even awarded. So basically, these are essential areas, essential MDAs that I wasn't expecting, things like that to be happening.
All right, let's look specifically at the finance ministry, because that is where a chunk of the problem seems to lie. Under it, we have the GRA, and then there are taxes, tax irregularities. Then you have the bit about the loan components, and then contracts and all of that. But why are we facing such a problem when it comes to taxes and tax irregularities? There's a whole lot in there to digest. What do you see?
Yeah, I think I mentioned it earlier in my submission. That attitude of government business, being no man's business. Therefore, as a matter of fact, how I'll go about it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, I'll be paid by the end of the month. You need to ask yourself, how many people have been paid and tied their, a monthly salary to their output when it comes to these MDAs? And clearly, we don't have that measure. And when it happens like that, obviously anybody will do any job anyhow. So the KPIs and then their measures tied to, the workers, output is what is missing here. And therefore, if at the end of the day, the person is supposed to collect 10 CDs, and it turns out that he's collecting only 1 CD and he's not being penalized for it, obviously such things will go on. So I'm not surprised to see that going on at all, especially MDAs and all these government agencies.
We have also had cause in recent times on the back of some other happenings, Achimota and the Achimota Forest and others, to take another look at our assets declaration regime. Interestingly, it comes in here as well. When you look at Article 189 of our Constitution and the Auditor General and his or her role and what is expected, let that trickle down to the Civil Service Act of 1993, specifically Section 89. You go back and you are having to deal with our assets declaration. In 1998, thereabouts, we created the window for a 6-month period, but we have seen that our politicians are simply flouting this regulation with impunity. They either do it, a few do it within the 6-month period, and some don't do it at all. We don't know what rests with the Auditor General in terms of what declarations they make, whether it's a blank sheet of paper or whatever. We do not know. This, also per the report, is a major problem. What do we do, Prof?
Yeah, I think we need to be careful how we compare, corruption to the recklessness index, financial recklessness index, because the financial recklessness index deals with, operational issues. Ability to collect your taxes, and then also, how you manage your cash. Sometimes, it could be a delay in payment, or it could be speed up of collection of your cash, which at the end of the day, you might think it's a government business. So if you delay in payment and there's that kind of penalty that goes with it, you may not care. At the same time, at the point where you're supposed to speed up your collection of cash, you may not be bothered about it because it's government business. Whether money comes into the coffers or not, government will definitely manage its way through, be whether through borrowing or not. So some of these petty things are things that are building up into our, debt, ballooning and all those, because at the end of the day, if you are not able to collect the revenue needed through taxes, if you are receiving a lot of penalties as a result of, not paying your commitment early, and at the same time speeding up your collections of revenue through taxes, then obviously, government will lack, the necessary funds to manage the country. And as a result of that, we'll end up thinking that monies that we need to manage the economy with are sitting out there somewhere. So we may have to go and borrow. I will not dissociate in this from the happenings from this index to the quantums of our borrowing that we've been doing. But we should be careful how we relate, this index to, corruption. I see this index to be more of operational, things.
And I concur, Prof. I agree with you, but I'm looking at the ends of procurement, of contracts and others, which are also very evident in this very index. In fact, Dennis, who is spearheading this drive at IMANI Africa, and he's here in the studio, he made mention of the suspicions and the fact, we've heard time without number, that sometimes even money is meant to be disbursed, let's say to, and I'm just using this as an example, let's say to NAPCO trainees or something. Someone sits on the money, invests the money, public money, into a personal account to reap interest before such monies are, or such money is put out there. All of that feeds into what we're talking about.
Yeah, that's obvious. When you have a system that, is not able to track where funds that are being invested are coming from, and then possibly where the funds are being used, these things are bound to happen. These things are things that, used to happen some time ago, and I'm not surprised it's repeating itself. Because I remember those days when we were at the university, our loans were at the point in time we're even on the street thinking that authorities, those in charge, have even invested the money, delayed it for about 90 days or something, ripped some treasury bills, interest rate out of it before, they release it to the users of the fund. But, these are things that happen if you don't have system to check. We may have the laws, but the laws, we put timelines to indicate that if money comes to your fold, as a responsibility officer, you don't have more than maybe 10 days or 5 days to keep the money in your fold. Or rather, it has to go to the next step. I don't know whether our PFM Act, makes room for that. There are laws that are open, but I think it lacks that timeline specificities. And as a result of that, any officer, remember we are human beings. There's no way, human beings will always behave rational. Even if you have 100 people, you're going to have 5 of them behaving irrational. And as a result of that, when they have money in their folds, they are likely to, avert the money for each purpose. And like I said, I always believe in one thing in financial management, especially public sector financial management. Money is earmarked for a purpose. If it is diverted, it has its own cost implications. But how many people will understand this? Because he thinks, okay, fine, if I keep the money, within maybe 30 days, I can get some interest on it. But the cost that you are creating as a result of discouraging this NAPCO trainees and all those, you may never know. So effectively, we need some capacity building in that regard. The laws were made, did we build up capacity to ensure that some of the possible implications on the economy, would it be realized? Because if you deny NAPCO trainees of their payment, obviously they go to work and they will be sitting idle. The zeal to work will not be there. So my understanding is that I think some of these things, it's about understanding the financial, know-how. They need to build up some financial literacy capacity. And some would think, financial literacy is knowing how to invest and all that. But there are other things that you need to know up to a certain level. And especially those working with this Ministry of Finance, Health, and MDAs, they must know the public sector especially.
All right. Right before I come back into the studio, because Dennis is here and he'll be walking us through the recommendations that IMANI Africa has come, to arrive at that we should be looking forward to. But I'd like to find out from you, on the basis of having read this document, on the basis of all that we are discussing here, how do we ensure less fiscal recklessness, more fiscal efficiency and effectiveness, especially from an institution like the Finance Ministry that is becoming predominantly reckless? What would be your proposals, Prof?
Yeah, I mean, you see, I'm yet to see in this country anybody that has, caused financial loss to the state. Because some of these things that are happening, cash irregularities, tax irregularities, and all those, as you've projected on your screens, are basically, a way of causing financial loss to the state. But, I'm yet to see whether the law, has grabbed somebody that the person is being penalized, for causing financial loss to the state through some of this recklessness. I'm yet to see that.
So you're pointing to the lack of will and the lack of what also evinces itself in Auditor General's past and present. Maybe take out Daniel Domelevo in terms of disallowing and surcharging.
Yeah, the surcharging and all those, but the question is, was it made public? You see, if you want to deter people from certain practices in the financial space, it is important to let the people know what kind of punishment you meted out to those who caused the financial loss to the state. You may punish them by silent, maybe you surcharge them, in the end they forfeit about 3 months of their salary. Who knows it? Nobody knows. So effectively, they will end up continuing what they are doing. But if you make it public, then the people get to know that, exactly. Let me tell you, management...
So naming and shaming is important then. That's what you're saying.
Very, very key. Very, very key. Very, very key.
Okay. Do stay with me in case you may have any concluding comments on this matter. Do stay with me so that you can also listen to Dennis Asare, and as we wrap the conversation, you would also have your final bite, Prof. But Dennis, so let's get to the recommendations. Now we know what this is. We know the components, what is feeding into this fiscal recklessness. We have a chart of the institutions involved. We have the ranking. Now the problem is how to solve this entire issue. What are the recommendations of IMANI?
So I think I'll pick up directly from where Prof left, is the enforcement of sanctions. That's the only way to deter people. We've seen people come to the Public Accounts Committee, and that was a sort of a naming and shaming system, but it's not working effectively because when the committee writes a report, who is even following through? Then again, we need to start looking at how the judicial system we have established to prosecute some of these issues to reformed to ensure some speedy prosecution of some of these cases, because in the Financial Administration Act 2003, we made provision to establish a Financial Administration Court that would solely look at the Auditor General's report and its outcomes. That court was not established. However, the Financial and Economic Court within the High Court section has also the mandate to look at some of these issues. But the will and the commitment of the Attorney General's office to do those prosecutions is what is lacking. And that can be as a result of the fact that the Attorney General's office may be, they're overwhelmed with work. And so sometimes coming down to issues related to Auditor General's report may not be of top priority to them. But because they play a key role in our PFM system by ensuring that sanctions are applied, if they fail to do that, then they are building that culture of tolerance for these irregularities.
I guess also part of the problem would be that our Attorney Generals, and it's not just restricted to this regime, they are politically tied. They are political appointees, so to speak. Yes. And so it becomes problematic. That is why some people have said that that should be detached so that the legal system can deal with whatever issues arise from these MDAs and more dispassionately.
Yes, and beyond that, if there are also delays in some of these sanctions being applied, sometimes it kind of, the extent of deterrence you want to see is not there. And as Prof rightly said, if you sanction people in the quiet or within their own offices, who sees it? Who is that one, that action deterring? So we need to find a way to streamline the work of our court system to enhance the prosecution. Then again, look at how we can build a system within the Attorney General's office that will be focused on only the outcome of the Auditor General's report. Now we have the Office of the OSP. Now the Office of Special Prosecutor has the mandate to even go into corruption issues in procurement. So now it's brought the OSP also into our PFM. That when the Auditor General does its assessment, issues that they point are deliberate abuse of the procurement law, follow through, and if there's any sort of corruption within that, then the OSP must pick it up. So what we are expecting to see is that the OSP must be interested in the PFM issues. Again,
and we've seen the OSP interested in some of these issues in recent times.
In recent times.
MC bits and
I think that was corruption related.
Exactly.
And looking at how he's following through with the former PPE,
yes,
it gives us a sense that if there's that strong collaboration between the OSP and the Auditor General, we will be making some headway in deterring people from wasting public resources. Another thing that we are also proposing is that the internal control system must be enhanced. Because if you take, let's say, tax irregularities, that may be the internal auditor's function may not be so high because it relies on the work of the GRE, although there are internal auditors there. But if you come to the other MDAs, issues related to contracts, procurement, rent, payroll, cash management, if there's an internal auditor who is giving more power and control, these things can be avoided before the external auditor comes in. And they always say that before the external auditor come and see, the internal auditor has already seen it, just that it's not being complied with. So we need to enhance the internal audit system. Then let's strengthen the compliance enforcement. Because at the highest level of this recklessness is tax irregularity. Because if tax irregularity alone is over 80% of the total irregularities that MDAs are incurring, and that if you put the tax and cash irregularities or look at only the Ministry of Finance and its agencies, and let's make that clear, they play a dual role as a sector ministry and a central management agency. Now, if their irregularities are about 11 billion out of 13 billion, it creates a sense that let's start going deeply into where this problem is coming from within the Ministry of Finance, and the main issues that the enforcement is, the compliance enforcement are not being enhanced.
And I like the fact that you say, let's go deeper, let's probe even further.
Yes.
You know why? Because your recommendations also stipulate that we must do a granular analysis. In other words, even the Auditor General's department's report, we must have a further breakdown.
Yes.
So we can narrow it down to this, to that, and maybe even to individuals.
Yes,
and that is where heads really start rolling.
Yes, that's what we were saying at the program, that we need to start disaggregating some of these reports by the Auditor General. Because the Auditor General reports a summary of the audits that they undertook. So it's become relevant for us to now start looking at, even within the Ministry of Finance, let's start separating the Ministry of Finance headquarters, that's the one we see at the Finance Drive, from its department agencies, so that when we report Ministry of Finance's recklessness, we know that within the Ministry of Finance's recklessness, the GRA contributed this amount to the recklessness. Controlling Accountant General's Department contributed this amount, or these sort of recklessness were centered around these agencies, so that we are able to compare the ministries alone, compare the department and agencies. Then we understand that within the department area, this is the challenge with fiscal responsibility or fiscal recklessness. If you come to the agency level too, this is the challenge with managing public funds. Then when you come to the broader ministries, we're able to identify so that we can have some tailored solutions for the ministries, department, and agencies. Another point is also looking at the mobilization. Because if we don't mobilize more, then these MDAs will consistently spend what belongs to government or what is supposed to be lodged into government's account. Because when they have programs and allocations have not come, the revenue targets are not being met, then they tend to fall on their IGF and they spend without approval, or some statutory taxes that they collect for government as a way of financing some of the activity. For example, last 2 years, we had cases of delays in disbursement of the District Assembly Common Fund.
Right.
Now, when there are those delays, then any statutory fund that they collect on behalf of government, they will now fall on that. So we need to enhance the mobilization, and enhancing that is tied to enhancing the level of enforcement. But at the center of all of this is the sanctions. Let's apply the sanctions at the higher level, that's at the courts level or that Attorney General's level. But when we bring it down to even the institutional level, heads of institution must feel a sense of commitment and responsibility in our PFM.
Okay. I'll come back to you for your summary comments, maybe in about a minute. But I'll give that option to Professor Mensah first. Professor Mensah, are you still with us?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So I would like you to give your summary comments, but take off from where Mr. Asare left off. Sanctions. Do you see that will to to bring this to bear? And how can we, I guess where we've got to now, the political will oftentimes, again, across regimes, is very low. How do we compel establishment to bring about these sanctions? Is it the work of civil society like IMANI is doing? What do we do? Or is it our work like media? What do we do?
Right. Before I go to that, let's look at the consumption of this information that is out there. Usually when indices are built, it serves as a guideline. Like I indicated earlier, we shouldn't take this to be as if it's an attack on the agency. Or rather, it should serve as a guide, group further, to know exactly where the problem may be coming from. But then, if you look at the sanctions, clearly, the sanctions are not, should I say, punitive enough, to deter people from what they do. Let me give you a typical example. If somebody causes, financial loss to the state, and it ends up that, there is a rule that he should go and pay the money back without any interest being charged. You think that would be enough to deter other people from doing this? I don't think so. So it boils down to the judiciary sometimes understanding financial concept, getting to know that any money that is diverted, any money that is delayed in payment must attract interest. So that education is very, very important.
So just to interject briefly, if I am getting your point properly, these people, when they get these sums, are going to either expend them or invest them. If they do invest them, their interest is going to accrue. So in other words, when we are surcharging you or whatever institution, it means then if you're paying through your nose with interest, you wouldn't want to do that again next time.
Of course, even more than the interest that you would have invested. That would scare people from doing that. To the extent of falling on your asset. Most of the time, what are the rulings that we see? I think I may have to look at that, categorize all the rulings and see. Most of them are in line of go and pay back the money. Go and pay back the money. That is all. And I don't see that to be scary enough, to deter people from practicing things like that. Because effectively, if I take the money and in the end I delay it, and I can earn interest on it, and you ask me to pay back only the money without any interest, which is more than the investment, interest that I'm going to make. Obviously, I'll be tempted to do some kind of this recklessness that, the index, comes out. So for me, the sanctions are not that strong, that comes out. And I believe it's understanding of, financial concept by those who are handling some of these issues. And like I said earlier, we may have to look at how we can build capacity for some of these responsible officers.
Professor Mensah, we are very grateful for your time with us this morning, and we wish you the best of the day, sir. Happy New Month to you. All right. That is Professor Lord Mensah, lecturer with the University of Ghana Business School. Your concluding comments, Dennis. Okay. Are you in agreement with Prof?
I agree entirely. There's a bit of
stiffer penalties.
Yes, stiffer penalties, capacity improvement. And I also believe that in terms of the sanctions, they are punitive, but it's about the application and consistency in the application. But just before I go to summarize, I would say that the Public Accounts Committee too must start exerting their influence and ensure that when they sit, after they make recommendations, they follow through to ensure that the recommendations are actually implemented. Else, we'll keep accumulating it, and the lag between submitting of the public accounts to Parliament must be corrected, because if there's delays, currently they are now dealing with 2019-2020 issues.
Right.
So that means that people who are supposed to be punished like 2 years ago are still walking around the country freely. But I would say that we are at a critical point of our development, and such recklessness is greatly unacceptable. About 45.6% of our population are multidimensionally poor. Almost 2.2 million people who live in rural areas are facing extreme poverty. The pandemic is worsening the life of people, and we are constantly seeing declining welfare. So it is not right for ministries, departments, and agencies to engage in this level of profligacy and flagrant abuse of public financial management systems. if we are going to achieve the development goals either within the Ghana Beyond Aid or the Coordinated Program for Social and Economic Development, then it is very imperative for us to now start looking within and how we can be very financially disciplined in the use of public funds. Else we wouldn't really go anywhere. And we are encouraging everybody, civil society, the media, citizens, to take up this report and demand accountability. Because if we don't start demanding accountability and the system is worsened, the effect is on citizens' livelihood. Our livelihood to be worsened, quality of service delivery, we can't get it. And day in and day out, we will now have to now go outside our public finances to go and borrow to finance projects. Meanwhile, the projects that we are financing, assuming we borrow to pay compensation, there are a lot of leakages within the system that could have paid that compensation. Assuming we borrow and use some to fund social interventions, there are a lot of money within the system that can be used to finance those assistance programs. So we have a lot within the system. Let's close all those loops before we start going out to look for alternative means to raise revenue. Thank you.
Well, we look forward to more of these indexes, because obviously it ruffles feathers, it gets people uncomfortable, hopefully, but we need them to be more uncomfortable so that they can be forced to do the right thing, as Prof has pointed out, and as you have pointed out as well. But maybe right before you go, so what are you hoping on the back of this? Just some 30 seconds. What are you hoping to see on the back of this latest index?
Okay, so what we intend to do after these media engagement is to now engage the Parliament Account Committee, let them also have a view of the report, the recommendations, and we will consistently engage in the social media advocacy to demand the accountability. What we would want to see is the Auditor General cracking the whip, disallowing and surcharging people. What we also want to see is the OSP and the Attorney General getting critically into our PFM, and cases that need to be prosecuted, we fast track that. And we also want to see civil society, media, and all other players coming together to help with the demand for accountability, so that going into the future, because now we are about to implement a new PFM framework, we shouldn't go in the new PFM framework with these errors or these loopholes not corrected.
Thank you so much, Dennis.
Thank you.
It's been rich this morning engaging with you. Dennis Asare, of course, a consultant with IMANI Africa, breaking down these matters for us, and we can only wish for the very best for Mother Ghana. Still coming up on the show, we'll let you have your say, then we'll give you your citizen's microphone. We'll also serve you AM Business. All of that up next after this.